And we want to welcome in an author, Judith Barr. She wrote Power Abused, Power Healed. Power, like lightning, is a raw, vibrant force of nature with the potential, for great harm and the possibility for magnificent good. Let me tell you a little bit about Judith before we bring her on, okay? Judith practices in Brookfield, Connecticut, and her background includes private practice as a psychotherapist since 1975, a Master of Science degree in counseling, and licensure as a mental health counselor. She's published an audio series, The Spoken Word on Behalf of the Feminine, and more than 24 articles for both professionals and the general public. Without further ado, we'd like to welcome Judith Barr to the show. Judith, how are you tonight?
Hi, how are you, Rod?
Good. Hey, Jude. Is it Judy? Can we go Judy or Judith?
It's Judith.
Judith, okay.
Yeah.
Well, we're so glad to have you on this evening.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be with you.
So have you been okay with the blizzard up there in the Northeast?
I didn't get it where I am as much as they got it further south.
Okay, all right.
I got about 4 or 5 inches.
Okay. That's not too bad in the grand scheme of things.
No, not compared to what they got further south.
Yeah, I think that, there's some people that want to live on the pity of that. My sister lives in Manhattan, and of course had to send me a video, of outside her apartment showing me the snow, like I hadn't seen that before. Well, Judith, this is, we were just talking in the first segment about, what it means to be normal and where power can fit into that. And so your book really goes nicely with that. Can you tell us a little bit about what brought you to write this book about the abuse of power and how power can be healing?
I started to write the book, Rod, because I was seeing and hearing about therapists and other people in the helping professions that were misusing and abusing their power. People were coming to me to do work from having had power abused with them. And it wasn't enough for me anymore to just help the people that were coming to me or witness, people telling me about what they'd gone through.
Sure.
I just felt like I really needed to do something about it.
What kind of abuses were you hearing, just in general? Like, what would be the typical person that would come in? What was their...
Well, one of the most frequently thought of is the therapist having some kind of sexual relationship with their client. So that was one of them. People refusing to deal with what was happening between them and their client and only dealing with the transference, and I'll just explain transference for anybody that doesn't understand it. This doesn't just happen in a therapist's office. It happens with us all, that we will transfer onto someone or some experience or something in the here and now, thoughts, feelings, perceptions, experiences we had when we were children with people who were usually authorities with us. So it does happen with therapists, but it also happens with employers and employees and marriage partners and friends. And I don't think it's possible to be a human being on our earth today without experiencing transference, even if you don't know what it is. So in therapy, it's a wonderful thing to have the transference come up and use it for healing, although many people are afraid of it and many therapists don't know how to work with it. But if the therapist only considers that what the client is concerned about as transference and doesn't look at if there's anything in the here and now between them that is awry, that could be a misuse of power. So that's another one of them. People that put themselves up as trustworthy and accuse their clients of not being trusting enough, of having trust issues. That's another example.
Yeah, so, you're mentioning one area where there's an abuse of power, within the therapist, relationship. It's also, you mentioned in the book, in the workplace, in the home, and other romantic relationships. What do you feel and is the real reasons people abuse this power in relation to those that they are, either in a professional relationship or a personal relationship with?
I really want to answer that, but I just want to say one more thing about what we were talking about first.
Go ahead.
As I was writing my book, it became clear to me that this book was not just about power and misuse of power in helping relationships. it became clear that it touched every arena. And as I was writing, the misuses and abuses of power in our country and our world were coming out into the light of day, one right after the other. So it just feels important that it's a time that this needs to be dealt with, and it's everywhere. And I'll give you an example of how the misuse and abuse of power gets developed in someone. Let's say you're a little girl or boy in your family, and your parents are very controlling, very domineering, and have expectations for you that are way beyond what you as a child could possibly do. And when you don't meet their expectations, they yell at you and they send you to your room for what seems like hours on end. And let's say you've just been sent to your room, you're in bed, you're crying yourself to sleep. And as you cry yourself to sleep, you try to bury the feelings that you're having, because feelings are so painful for little children that they can't tolerate them, they can't bear them. So you try to bury, even though you are crying yourself to sleep. And one of the ways you do this is by making what I call early decisions, even if you're not aware that that's what it is, even if you're not aware that this decision is going to drive your life in the future. And this particular night, as you're crying yourself to sleep, you say, mumble under your breath, "You have the power now, Mommy, Daddy. But when I grow up, I'm going to have all the power." And then when you grow up and you have a position of power, whether it's as a parent or an employer or a governor or a senator or a chief justice or a president, you will think you are using your power well, perhaps. You may even look like you're using your power well. There may even be aspects of your use of power that are very healthy, but someplace inside you, from that night, there's going to be a part of you that is determined to have power over Mom or Dad, and is going to be acting from a power struggle, even if you aren't aware of it.
Yeah, and you know, the struggle, when I'm thinking about that example with the children, is that then when they are talking, let's say, about boys that will act out in school and that kind of thing, it's so misplaced and misunderstood from the educator side of that. And then the parents, it just solidifies in their mind why they potentially punished them in the first place.
Right.
You know, and it just continues to build and go on and on and on, and we lose complete sight of really why this child is acting this way.
Exactly.
And we focus on the grades and everything else that we have, you know, in our country that we measure success by. Yes. Why, Judith, do you think people put up with this, you know, abuse in their own lives on a day-to-day basis?
Well, the first thing, Rod, is this comes from a time in our life as children, as babies even, when we actually are powerless. If you're a little child and your parents don't have a relationship with you where they attune to you, where they really see you, where they want to understand what's going on inside you and why you are acting the way you are, and wants to try to help you with that, if that's not what's happening, then you're experiencing powerlessness in a way that will feed what we're talking about here, that will feed the misuse and abuse of power, and perhaps feed your tolerating it. That same night, if you had been lying in bed crying yourself to sleep and made a different decision, let's say you made a decision, if this is power, I don't want to have anything to do with it. Or let's say you made a decision, I'm at their mercy and there's nothing I can do to change it, then that kind of decision that would be made would feed our tolerating the misuse and abuse of power. We feel powerless. We've decided already that there's nothing we can do about it. We've decided even that we don't want to have any power, and then that will feed our tolerating it.
And do you think that also feeds into why we, I guess, turn a blind eye to the abuse of others when we see that's happening, you know, within, you know, the people that we interact with?
Yes, I do. I do think it has to do with the witness who is observing or witnessing abuse if they don't say something, I think it has to do with their own early experiences of powerlessness and their own early experiences of making decisions. Maybe they're afraid that if they step in, they're going to be the one that the abuser turns on.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder too, Judith, if there's just a sense of apathy, because when you're looking upon, maybe you're seeing or witnessing some abuse, whether it's emotionally driven, is that you don't even know if that's normal or what you might think is normal. There's such a challenge internally to say, gosh, am I witnessing abuse right now, or is that normal? Because I know as a little kid, I used to hear this, in my therapy world, and I, as a kid too, you grow up, you don't even know, you just think where you are is normal. And then there's a certain age for all of us where we say, wait a minute, when I saw mom and dad act like that, I noticed that my buddy's parents didn't do that. Mm-hmm. There's a discrepancy there. And as a kid, you don't know exactly what to do with that other than that painful feeling like you talked about.
I think that's true, that as children we think that our own home situation is normal, but that's not just because we're children thinking that. That's because what's happening there is normalized.
Yeah.
And I think in our society, abuse has been normalized, even though people have also become aware of it, and there's also people that are doing things about it. I think it's just been normalized so that people just start to feel like, well, it's bound to happen. This is the way things are. I can't do anything about it. Maybe they decided as children they couldn't, so that decision gets carried over into adult life. Mm-hmm. But, I wanted to say something about those decisions. They are what comes out of our early childhood experience, and we have decided that that is the truth. But it's important for us to remember it is also a huge defense against the feelings. And I think the thing that's really brought our society astray, made things awry, is the terrible fear we have of feelings. Not just from the fear of a little child for whom those feelings are too much to bear, but then we grew up, and then we have become people who, and of course this isn't everybody, thank goodness, but we become people who try to keep other people from feeling, because then it'll trigger our feelings. We shame other people for feeling. We threaten other people if they're going to feel. We ridicule them, we humiliate them, and we drug them. Mm-hmm. That our society is really and we try to get them to manage their feelings and control them instead of heal inside so that they can feel them safely.
Yeah. Do you think, Judith, it makes me think as you're talking that I wonder if people just on a day-to-day basis can even define the complexity of abuse. And I wonder if that's part of the issue, because I'm thinking of so many different people in my life that have either been that are currently in my life or have passed me through my life, that I wonder if they felt like, well, I'm not sure if this was abuse or not, and so I'm just going to avoid that feeling and sort of stay away from it. What's sensationalized is male on female physical abuse.
It's generally going to be something to the extreme.
Yeah.
However, it seems like the more minute areas of abuse, whether, just even neglect or, something just in some smaller, small verbal things over, especially as a child and growing up, you don't really understand that impact because there's not a physical or an immediacy to it.
Absolutely.
So, that makes me curious, because what we're really talking about here is a lot of times when people think of abuse, it is that extreme, in male, the gender component a lot of times, or the physical abuse. But you talk about, there's so many examples of people abusing power in the workplace. Can you give us some examples and reasons why?
Well, verbal or silent threats that if you don't do a job a certain way, that you'll be fired, or threats, again, verbal or silent, that if you don't stay late whenever your boss wants you to stay late, that you'll your job or your position in some way is in jeopardy. Manipulation, putting more on somebody than they can possibly be able to produce, and I'm hearing myself say these examples, and they're very much akin to the childhood example I gave at the very beginning. I think there's, unfortunately, a lot of sexual harassment and sexual innuendo that goes from very blatant to very, very subtle. And the very, very subtle can be just as scary, just as threatening as something that is more overt and more physical, because you never know when that very subtle innuendo is going to burst open into something that is more physical.
Yeah, and it makes me think, too, that, I don't know why I'm sort of on this kick, Judith, but it feels like we're just such an apathetic society that that we're so afraid to speak up for injustice that we take the abuse.
It's become, it's like Shane mentioned previously, we become to where we've accepted it as that's just, that's normal.
We just don't have a choice anymore. Whether, I'm thinking about when you're talking about, staying longer hours and these other things that, people are so desperate to keep their jobs, especially today, that they're, being pulled in all kinds of directions and asked to do 2 and 3 people's jobs worth of work a week.
So, just like, Judith, you had mentioned, is, increased expectations on individuals. This is an example of in the workplace as adults, but that was the similar example that you had given, for parents with children.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Rod, you've talked about apathy a couple of times, and this past time you added fear. I think apathy is a layer that covers over the fear. And yes, I think there's huge fear in our society. And one of the things I've been aware of for a long time, but really very blatantly since 9/11, is there are major things happening in our country and our world that are very frightening. There's 9/11, there's the Iraq War, there's the recession, and what those things do is they stir up the fear. Some of it's here and now, but I think most of it is really young fear that's still alive inside us from when we were kids.
And being opened up now.
Right, and when people don't understand that, then they try to do things in the here and now to hold back their fear, to hold it at bay, to fix what's going on, and they never deal with the root of it, because if they deal with the root of it,
that could bring up even more pain.
It will bring up more pain, it will bring up more fear, but it will also, if you really work through it, it will help you deal with the here and now fear with better choices, wiser choices, healthier actions.
Absolutely. Well, we're up against a commercial break, Judith, but when we come back, I want to talk about how power can be healing, and we'll talk about how you structured the book, because I think that's very unique for people. We've got Judith Barr. She wrote Power Abused, Power Healed. And Judith, let's get right back to it. What happens if we don't become aware of it or deal with it, and, we try and heal the feelings that lie at the root of that abuse?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand your question.
Oh, what happens if we don't become aware of, or deal with the abuse as we're moving forward? If we don't really look at the root of that, trying to figure out how we can maybe look at this in a positive way. But first, what happens if we don't?
Well, what happens if we don't is all the roots of the abuse that we either act out on with others, or that is acted out on us and is a repeat for us, all of that gets pushed down and buried again in us. And then it will come back up again. And it really, in a sense, will haunt us until we do take the time and the focus and make the commitment to do the healing. But the problem is that it will probably escalate each time it comes back up again. And I think that's part of what's happening in our world, with the suicide bombs and the wars and all the escalation, theft and suicides in our country with the recession. That is part of, I think, what's happening.
So Judith, are you saying that, just we can't ignore that? You kind of have to look back before you can go forward?
Absolutely, Christie.
And you mentioned the therapist role and some of those relationships. For someone in doing this work, it is very beneficial to have someone that can be objective, such as a therapist. What would you recommend for those out there that would be looking to find a therapist to deal with this? What do they need to look for?
Well, the first thing I want to say is there is an article on my website on powerabusedpowerhealed.com that has a number of things to look for in a therapist or a spiritual helper. And I'll tell you a couple of the top ones. You want to find somebody who does his or her own healing work. And many therapists don't. There are some who do, but there are many who don't. So you want to make sure yours does. Pardon, Rod?
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, that's a scary thing.
Yes, that is a scary thing. So that's the top of my list, that the person needs to be doing their own healing work. It's not just they did it when they were training and it's done.
Right. They did it 15 years ago and they feel great.
Right. Or they did a group process when they were getting their degree and they were taught that that's all you need. That's very upsetting to me. The person also needs to have another professional with whom they consult about the work they're doing with clients. In our field, as you know, it's called supervision. It doesn't mean you have a boss that's supervising you, but it's getting input from another professional so you're not isolated with the work you're doing. The next one is that you're not afraid, this person is not afraid of his or her feelings, and they're not afraid of your feelings. And you can't not be afraid of your own feelings if you haven't done your work.
Absolutely, and hoping that, letting people know, and I gather from your approach, Judith, that you be a strong supporter of this, that, people can be empowered in the therapeutic relationship to speak up to that provider and ask those questions. I think that we see that in all areas of healthcare where people are afraid to sort of ask those baseline or questions that can really define if that's going to be the right provider for them.
Absolutely. I know I tell some of my clients when they're going to find a new doctor, I'll suggest to them, go have some interviews with doctors.
Absolutely.
And they'll say, interviews?
Right.
What?
And I'll say, yes, I would never start working with a doctor unless I had sat down with them in their office, fully clothed, and said, this is what I need, this is who I am. Who are you, and how, and do we match? Do we
Absolutely.
get the right fit?
Ensure the fit. I mean, really, that's the key.
Absolutely.
Judith, in the closing, minutes that we have with you, what are some examples of where power has been used successfully or in a healing manner?
I could give you lots of different examples, Rod, and if you want me to come back and do some others, I will. But the one that I focus on most is that if you do your own healing work, that is the most powerful thing you can do. Because if you do that work, then using power becomes a part of the very fabric of your life, part of the very fabric of your being, using it well, using it for good. It's not just an action you do, but as you go deeper and deeper into your healing, it becomes, in essence, who you are and how you use your own life force. So to me, that's the number one way that power can be used for magnificent good.
And then there's just a ripple effect from
Absolutely.
from there.
I appreciate you saying that. I mean, there's a level of honesty that people need to get to with themselves before they can approach other people or other projects or issues out there. Right. And if they can find and at least understand, that's what I would always say in my past life in that world. We don't know what the puzzle pieces are going to bear out, but it's just feeling comfortable enough to be able to sit in the same room with those puzzle pieces. And to see how they might or might not fit together and how they impact your life. And you're so right. I mean, that can help kids, our colleagues, our friends, our spouses. Judith, we've got your book on our website, but if you can list your website again, we'll make sure that people can get to you.
Great. It's www.powerabusedpowerhealed.com.
Great.
Yes, and Judith, in your book, you did such a great job of giving this message and information in a story. I think that makes it easier to understand and to relate to, because these are some difficult topics to discuss and to think about in relation to our own experiences. So for all of those out there that are interested, it's heavy information, but the way it's given, it makes it easy to work through and digest.
Yeah, it's very accessible. So well done on that, Judith, because
Thank you.
In that world, there can be so many things out there that are so inaccessible to the public, and so this is nice that it shares it in a way that people can understand and can relate to. So continued success, and thank you so much for being on the show, and happy holidays.
Thank you.
Thanks, Judith.
Thanks, Judith.
I've been delighted to be with you.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Okay, good night.
Good night.